Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Board of Rabbis of Southern California webinar. Today we have two wonderful speakers. It's my pleasure first to introduce Rabbi Jonathan Bernhard Jaffe. After 25 years at Adat Ariel, which, if you don't know, is a wonderfully vibrant congregation in Los Angeles, he decided to step away from the pulpit and explore new and meaningful ways of contributing to the Jewish community. And this journey led him to become the director of clergy engagement at the Center for Jewish Food Ethics and to co-found the Valley Chaver Kadisha, working towards bringing green burial practices to the Jewish community as well as part of that traditional Chaver Kadisha work. And then in July of 2025, because he wasn't busy enough, he became the rabbi at Temple Shalom of the South Bay. He and his wife Lori still live in the San Fernando Valley. They have 3 grown sons, 2 dogs who they let sleep in their bed, and 4 noisy chickens who I assume they do not let sleep in the bed. It's wonderful to have our colleague and friend, Rabbi Jonathan Bernhard Jaffe, with us to teach us today. I'm only going to go off camera because I am eating because it's a Jewish food event and I felt like I had to eat during.
No problem, and hopefully nothing I say will actually put you off your food. This is my one hope. So welcome, thank you so much. A pleasure to be able to come and share some work about which I'm deeply passionate. It's been really one of the benefits of stepping away from an intense and full-time pulpit is the opportunity to focus on some of those passion projects and be able to kind of give a lot of attention to them. And I happen to fall into a wonderful community, wonderful group of people to work with in terms of working on animal ethics and animal welfare. So the talk that I'm going to give today is going to be focusing on Tsar Ba'alei Chaim, on the unnecessary suffering caused to animals. And I'm going to begin a screen share at this point in time. So just bear with me for a second as I manage the technology. Oops, hold on a second. And one last click. Okay. So when Charles Darwin published his 2 major works on evolution, On the Origin of Species in 1859 and The Descent of Man in 1871, one of the loudest criticisms focused on his claim that human beings and other animals were closely related. And religious and non-religious thinkers alike were deeply offended by the suggestion that the gap that we believed that separated humans from other creatures was far smaller than they had assumed. And they sort of felt that Darwin's theory undermined human dignity by challenging human uniqueness. Interestingly, our Torah does not seem to share this same anxiety. Because from the very first chapter of Genesis, the Torah emphasizes that human beings and other animals have in common, right? So though we often say, for example, that the first mitzvah that was given to human beings was to be fruitful and multiply from Genesis chapter 128, it's worth noting that this is not the first time that the commandment is given. So in fact, the first time the commandment is given is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 22, and it is given to all the animals, with God blessing them and saying the same thing, pru or vui, milu, in this case, etayam, beyamayim, v'ha'of, yerev, be'aretz, and so forth. So it talks about filling the waters and the seas and increasing the earth and so forth, but the idea is the same. They're told to pru or vu. Likewise, interestingly enough, when it comes to food, all animals, including humans, are to share the same basic diet in the beginning of creation, and that is plants, right? So we see in Genesis chapter 1, verse 29 and verse 30, God saying, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food. Right? This is God talking to human beings. And then to all the animals on the land, to all the birds of the sky, and everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food. And it was so. So we see here from the very beginning that when it comes to food and it comes to sex, right, human beings and animals share these basic drives. And the Torah's acknowledgement that we share these fundamental impulses with the rest of creation demonstrate this deep awareness of our continuity within the animal world, Unlike in Darwin's time, when people were focusing on how separate they are, the Torah acknowledges that there's very, very basic things that we share with all sentient life. And Maimonides is going to make this point even more explicit. In the Guide for the Perplexed, he writes, oops, hold on a second. He writes, there is no difference in this case between the pain of a man and the pain of other living beings, since the love and tenderness of the mother for her young ones exists not only in man, but in most living beings. And here he's talking about the commandment to shoo away the mother bird before taking the eggs. And he's noting, right, that these sentient creatures share feelings. He understands that they have feelings just like humans have feelings, right? Darwin was accused of collapsing this boundary between humans and animals. But the truth is, our own tradition had already blurred that line long, long ago and understood that human beings exist in a continuity with other species, not as something totally separate. Now, this sensitivity, which has been there from the very beginning of our tradition, becomes concretized in the mitzvah of tsar ba'alei hayim, the biblical level prohibition against causing unnecessary suffering to animals. And so throughout the Torah and rabbinic literature, we find numerous instructions about how to care properly for the animals in our charge. So, for example, just kind of going with the biblical take, the commandment to observe Shabbat, right? If we read that text in both Exodus and Deuteronomy, it lists all the people who are meant to rest, and it makes a note of all the animals too, that animals deserve a rest on Shabbat. They're not to be worked ceaselessly and worked into the ground. You also see it in the Bible where it talks about, in two places, about helping an animal who's collapsed under the burden of its load, under the weight that it is carrying, and the obligation to go and help that animal. And in fact, those two cases in Exodus 23 and Deuteronomy 22 will become the basis for the rabbinic claim that Tsar Ba'alei Chaim is in fact a Doraita, a Torahitic commandment. You also see it in other things. In this case, do not muzzle an ox while it threshes, because it's just considered cruel. While it's threshing and it has the food right there in front of it, to muzzle it is just it's just inhumane. It's not fair. And then of course we also see it in the commandment to send away the mother bird before taking her young. You also, by the way, see it not only in the Bible, but you also have the rabbinic take on it, because expanding on what we read in the Torah, you see that the rabbis will pick up on the obligation to relieve an animal that is suffering under its burden, as I mentioned. They use this as the basis for claiming this is a Torahitic commandment. You also have the question that gets asked and then answered about relieving an animal's pain on Shabbat, right? So when you have the competing value observing Shabbat with Tsar Ba'alei Chaim, right, under a number of circumstances, you can say that, according to the rabbis, that Tsar Ba'alei Chaim supersedes Shabbat. And one may relieve an animal's pain. And you also, I just threw this one in for fun. In Brachot, it also talks about how a person must feed their animals before they feed themselves. And one of my favorite sources that reflects this rabbinic sensitivity actually comes from the Shulchan Aruch, and it says the following: the custom is to say to one who is wearing new clothing, you should wear it out and get a new one. And there is one who writes that this is not said for shoes or clothing made from animal skins. For if it would be so, it would be necessary to kill another animal first to make new garment from it. And as it is written, and God's compassion is upon all of God's creatures. I just happen to really love love that particular take on the custom that again reflects this deep sensitivity to animals and the pain in which we sometimes will inflict upon them, and the obligation to try to minimize that pain as much as possible. So across the Jewish world, it doesn't matter from renewal to Orthodox, halachic authorities and rabbis and teachers emphasize not only the prohibition of cruelty, but also the positive obligation to meet animals' needs. Right? So classically speaking, Tsar Ba'alei Chaim is not some kind of fringe pietism. It is a mainstream binding halachic principle. And now the trouble begins. Now the trouble begins because until relatively recently, the American food system operated in ways that were, for the most part, honestly compatible with our tradition's requirements for animal well-being. As I am often asked and will answer, Judaism is not a vegan tradition. Judaism permits the consumption of animals, right? That's not the problem. The problem is that we are obligated to take care of those animals, to see to their well-being. In fact, arguably, right, our ability to consume animals is a privilege that comes to us because of our willingness and ability to take care of these animals properly. So, as I said, until relatively recently, going back about 70 years, this really wasn't a problem within Jewish tradition or for Jewish tradition. But then factory farming began, and it began in the mid 20th century, and it began for a couple of reasons. In part, post World War II advances in antibiotics, feed formulation, and mechanized housing made it possible to raise animals indoors in extremely high densities. So what you see is by the 1950s and 60s, confinement systems for chickens and pigs had become the dominant model, replacing smaller diversified farms. And then you get to the 70s and 80s, where you have what's called these large-scale CAFOs, CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operations. And these had fully emerged during those decades. And these are industrialized facilities that are created to maximize output while minimizing costs, a perfectly understandable capitalistic principle. However, it is done with animal welfare treated as an externality, as almost as an afterthought. And so, just to kind of give you a sense of what we're looking at, a CAFO is a facility confining thousands of animals in high density for our meat, our dairy, and our eggs. And a single large one of these will house at least 1,000 cattle, 2,500 pigs, and 30,000 broiler chickens. And in the US today, over 98% of chickens, turkeys, pigs, and farmed fish are raised in these factory farm conditions. And I should also point out about three-quarters of cows will spend a significant portion of their lives in similar systems. Cows are a little bit different because you have cows that are raised for beef, like the ones you see if you're driving up the coast past the Harris Ranch. You'll see them outside, and people are like, "Oh, look at the cows having a nice time outside." Yeah, those are the cows that are being raised for beef, and they do have a better life than most any other animal in the system. Um, Except for the last chunk of their life, the last couple of months of their life when they're moved indoors to get ready for slaughtering, in which case they are fully informed and part of the factory farm system. And dairy cows we'll get into a little bit later, but their treatment is really quite dreadful. And so what we see today is that for most animals in our food system, the farm is not a red barn. They're not on Old McDonald. They're not at Old McDonald's place, right? It is a windowless warehouse with a manure lagoon outside. And this is true more or less for almost all the animal products that we purchase in our supermarkets, including the ones that are kosher. So, with the advent of factory farming 70 years ago, we are now confronted with a direct challenge to the Torah's prohibition against unnecessary cruelty. And just to give you a little sense, and I won't go into gross detail about it, but just to give you a little sense of what we're talking about here when we talk about the impact that this system has on animals. We're going to just look at two chickens and dairy cows, and this is just part of the impact. So chickens are now bred to grow so fast that they can actually barely stand. Right? These birds get so big so quickly that their legs are not able to support them. And a recent analysis estimates that around 6% of US meat chickens, roughly 60 million birds a year, die before they even reach the slaughterhouse. Right? Just to give you a sense of kind of the intensity of the conditions that they're under. Chicks are debeaked early on, and they're debeaked to prevent injury caused by the severe crowding, right? Because these chickens are so closely packed together and their lives are so different than what a normal chicken's life is, right? They're in these cages for the most part that have this wire mesh, and they have almost no space to move. Now, as Ehud said in his introduction, we have chickens in our house. Well, not in our house, outside. Um, and when you watch these birds, you see they need some space. They don't need an enormous amount of space, but they need space because they need to spread out. They need to spread their wings. They take dust baths and they also peck at one another because you know that thing called the pecking order that they talk about? That's true. There's definitely a hierarchy amongst our chickens that they establish and as part of them being their chickeny selves, right? You can't do any of that within within these cages. They have no ability to actually live their natural life. And so they have to be debeaked because they start pecking at one another and in fact resort to cannibalism if they're left unattended and left just in those conditions without being debeaked. The laying hens, the ones that we use for eggs, live in these battery cages with less space, really, than, as it says, a sheet of paper. And they're unable to stretch their wings, nest, establish a pecking order, or dust bathe themselves. It's for a chicken, it is a thoroughly, in almost every single way possible, an unnatural environment. And as noted before, the broiler chickens are bred so to grow so fast, they can't even stand. And just to give a sense of cows, right? Because this is where our eggs come from, but check out the dairy cows, right? So in order to produce the milk that we like to drink, cows must be kept pregnant every year. It takes 9 months, just like with humans, for a cow to give birth, right? And as soon as they give birth, there's a short waiting period of time, and they are forcibly impregnated again in order to make sure that they will start producing or keep producing milk, right? And by the way, in order to protect the milk that is being produced, calves are taken from their mothers, oftentimes within hours, if not days, of being born. Right? You just can imagine kind of the distress that causes. Also, the high milk production, right? Having cows constantly be pregnant, constantly producing milk, leads to lameness, painful mastitis, and early slaughter, right? So that the normal age of a cow is between 15 to 20 years. Within this system, they're lucky if they manage to live 4 or 5 years. Now I share some of these things, and frankly, what I'm sharing here is a pretty gentle description of what these factory farm conditions are like, because fuller accounts of factory farm conditions are honestly, it's revolting. The simple reality is this: whatever we say about the system, this is structural tsar ba'alei chaim, right? Because suffering is built into the very business model. And I should also point out that the impact of this model and of this system is not limited just to the animals that are there to produce our food, right? Meat packing and slaughterhouse workers experience some of the highest rates of injury and PTSD-like symptoms in American industries across the board, right? Factory farming not only brutalizes animals, it brutalizes people. And by the way, these are largely poor immigrant workers who absorb the physical and emotional costs of our cheap meat. But beyond just the impact it has on the animals and on the workers, right, there are also, and I say this with a nod towards the next speaker, there are also environmental impacts of the factory farm system, which are massive, right? So the concentrated animal feeding operation produces an estimated 885 billion pounds of manure each year. And this is essentially untreated and unregulated by any government agency. And the spill out into the land around causes dreadful, dreadful environmental impacts. In 2012, factory farms produced 13 times more waste than the entire US population. And the EPA estimates that CAFO population impairs about 40% of our rivers and our streams because of the runoff and because it is unregulated. And just in terms of a not particularly efficient system, nearly 50% of US corn and 70% of US soy go to feeding CAFO animals, absorbing massive amounts of water, land, and fossil fuels, all of which accelerates the impact that these operations have on our climate. So when you add it up, factory farming is a major driver of biodiversity loss, water pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and it's all to support a system that normalizes animal suffering. Um, so let's talk though about the responses, because this has been going on for 70 years, which I understand within Jewish tradition, 70 years is relatively short period of time. But there is a growing recognition within the Jewish world that factory farming poses a profound challenge in our ability to observe the mitzvah of Tsar Ba'alei Chaim. And I'm just going to share just a few examples, though I'm sure with the group that we have here representing different movements, other people will know of other instances. So the rabbinical assemblies, the union, if you will, of conservative rabbis, their Committee on Jewish Law and Standards issued a paper banning the practice of shackling and hoisting, which was chaining a conscious animal by one leg and hoisting it upside down for shechita, declaring that it unquestionably constitutes a violation of Tsar Ba'alei Chaim, and is therefore, the meat that would come from that is therefore asur. And they also, by the way, prohibited the slaughter pens that inverted the animal before slaughter. Only upright restraining pens, they said, met Jewish welfare standards, right? And I bring this just as an example of clear a clear instance of halakhic authorities confronting a modern slaughter practice and saying, even if some will say it's technically kosher, it violates Tsar Ba'alei Chaim and therefore must stop. The CJLS also considered and talked about veal, and the conversation and the tshuvot around it were very interesting. So Rabbi Pamela Barmish's tshuva generated strong debate. She was the lead author for one of the tshuvot. And a number of people responded, in disagreeing with her, but even the ones who disagreed with her writing in dissent would begin by acknowledgement that there's no disagreement that egregiously inhumane raising of veal is clearly a violation of Tsar Ba'alei Chaim. Right? So here we see, once again, when the crates and the chains are visible, so to speak, our poskim begin to say that some products may be halakhically questionable, even if they bear a hechsher. And this awareness took on its most tangible form, at least in the conservative movement, when there was an attempt to create a new hechsher. And this was called the Magen Tzedek Initiative. And it was an ethical kashrut certification that made animal welfare one of its pillars. And it required compliance with certified humane animal welfare audits, drawing on standards from the Humane Farm Animal Care, which limits confinement, mutilations, and other harmful practices. So Magen Tzedek represents a sincere attempt for kashrut without Tsar Ba'alei Chaim is not enough. It's not enough to justify and give us permission to consume the food that comes from these factory farms. And for a variety of reasons, sadly, the initiative ultimately did not succeed, but the ethical question that it raises remains before us. And so where can we go from here? Right? I always feel that if someone is going to make a presentation where they say, hey, we have these problems within our community, we're obligated to be able to come forward and say, okay, but there's some solutions that we can begin looking at and begin using as a way of addressing some of these challenges. So I'm just going to share a few, but they're by no means exhaustive. So going forward, things to consider, options for us to consider as rabbis. So first, I would encourage experimentation with more plant-based eating. Right? As noted, 98%, close to 99% of everything that we buy from a supermarket when it comes to beef, eggs, and dairy, all come from factory farms and therefore are challenged by violation of Tsar Ba'alei Chaim. Okay, so start experimenting with more plant-based eating. And there's resources out there. Two organizations in particular, Jewish Vegan Life and Shemaim, offer a number of resources in terms of meals to cook and places to find food. Excellent, excellent resources. The other thing that we can do, both on a personal and really as a communal practice, depending on where we're sitting, is boycotting high cruelty products, such as eggs that are from battery cages or crate raised veal, right? Those kinds of products should be avoided, if one can. And there are ways of finding eggs that are not from these battery cage factory farms. Going forward, in terms of our own public leadership as rabbis, oh, actually, no, first, going forward, let's talk about institutional food policies. So, as clergy, whatever institution we're part of, be it a synagogue, a school, an agency of some sort, anytime we do catering or we have a committee, synagogue or otherwise, it's worth approaching and saying, can we adopt higher welfare or plant-based by default kinds of menus? And by the way, higher welfare and plant-based by default do not mean the exclusion of all these products. Right? It just means either paying attention to where the food comes from and making sure that it is ethically produced, or offering meat or dairy and eggs, but also offering plant-based food as the default, which is to say, for example, when you go to Starbucks and you ask for a latte, they put in dairy, they put in milk from a cow, right? That's their default. And if you want the oat milk, you got to pay extra, right? So what a default menu is a default menu isn't taking away the option of having meat or dairy. It's just saying make the plant-based meal the default and have people ask for the other food. The shift that we've done this with a number of organizations, and the ability to impact an organization's culture, and eating habits are tremendous. I would also say that as an institution, we can consider prioritizing suppliers that avoid extreme confinement and use credible third-party welfare certifications. In addition, we can adopt a simple written policy for a congregation or for our institution, where we're just committed to reducing factory farm purchases over a period of time. Again, not taking away, but just taking less. And also requiring at least one substantial plant-based option at every event is a lovely thing to do. As someone who is plant-based in their eating, I would really appreciate it. And in fact, I should say that in my experience, this is in fact becoming more and more a policy at the places that I'm seeing. And I would also, and this is just a shameless plug. It is the only shameless plug I'm going to put in there. You can also partner with the place where I am working, the Center for Jewish Food Ethics, which identifies industrial and animal agriculture as a primary test case for Jewish ethical reasoning. And our goal is to help institutions create more ethical food systems, and more ethical food policies for their institutions. And lastly, going forward, the other thought I would put out there for us as clergy is to teach about Sar Lechem and Baal Tashchit explicitly, either in relationship to factory farming, to climate change, or to worker justice. It's interesting to me when I reflect upon my own rabbinate and my own time at Adat Ariel. I was there for 25 years. I did not give a lot of sermons on this stuff. I mean, I gave a few, and especially towards the end of my time there, a few more, but I didn't speak a lot about Sar Lechem. For so many years, I really thought that that was really just for pets, right? And it's not. It's definitely not. And also, another topic that I spoke very infrequently on, and I'd be curious to hear if others speak about it more, is Bal Tashchit, is the commandment to not waste. Because one of the things that's really noticeable about factory farmings is their gross inefficiency, not just their cruelty and inhumanity, but their gross inefficiency. If we're looking at ways of sustaining and making our earth more hospitable, and habitable over a long period of time, one of the things we really have to consider is just the level of waste from these factory farms and, frankly, in our society in general. I think it would also be great as leaders if we consider supporting local and national campaigns for meaningful animal welfare reform, and also, of course, to collaborate with organizations such as mine, such as Shemaim, and others that provide ready-made curricula and tools for Jewish communities to be able to go forward. We're all here to support, those communities that are interested in exploring. And as I noted, most of the work that we do, most of the work that others do in this area, it's not all or nothing, right? Ours is an attempt to bring an awareness of a problem that is, as I said, relatively new within the broad scope of Jewish history, something that's come along because of changes in our food system and how it's become much more industrialized. Because the truth is, we already have the Chuvot on specific practices, we already have an ethical kashrut framework, and we have organizations that are there to help communities shift. The question really is, what will we do in our rabbinates and in our institutions to bring our food practices in alignment with our Torah? Any questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
First, go ahead, Jason.
I have to one of you could speak to the routine use of antibiotics for in factory farming, and also could you talk a little bit about fish, wild versus farmed, and anything else that you could illuminate us about?
So look, when it comes to antibiotics, yeah, look, we use the antibiotics within the system because we actually have the animals too close to one another. It's the overcrowding itself, right? And as well as just the
I
lack of
understand it's also to make them more plump.
I don't know if it's the antibiotics, but there are other things that are hormones that are injected that do that. Plus, the birds themselves have been genetically bred to become as big as possible. So it's the combination of those things that get the birds to be so very big. And by the way, they not only get big, but they they do so much quicker, right? So they grow incredibly fast over a short period of time because it's more efficient and more profitable.
I'm gonna,
Now,
sorry, I'm gonna have to jump because we have another speaker.
yes,
So sorry, and I want to give Becca her time as well. If you do,
absolutely.
thank you so much, Jonathan. If you do have follow-up questions, please just directly email them to Jonathan, and he'll even come meet you. He's one about that. One of the nice things he told me about not being in the pulpit is that he has time to like actually go and have coffee or plant-based lunch with someone. So he'll be happy to. So thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
And we are now going to welcome Becca Estrada, who is the Southern California Director of California Interfaith Light and Power. She received her MDiv from the Fuller Theological Seminary here in Southern California, Pasadena, and her BBS in Ministry and Leadership at the Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene, Texas. Before joining California Interfaith Power and Light, Becca served as the Director for Christian Life at the University of Southern California and pioneered a new role on campus as the first eco chaplain at USC. Named after her hometown of Earth, Texas, you can watch Becca's story of becoming an eco-chaplain in the mini-documentary Becca from Earth. It's my pleasure to welcome Becca Estrada.
Thank you, Rabbi Sela, for such a kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your time with me. I'm excited to connect with all of you. So let me share my screen. I will do a short presentation and do my best to leave lots of time for Q&A. So our organization is California Interfaith Power and Light, and our mission is to inspire and mobilize individuals and communities of faith and conscience to take bold and just climate action. So we are an interfaith network with around 730 member congregations across the state of California, as well as 40 other state chapters. So we're not in every state, but we do have a large presence in the US and here in California. So we primarily focus our time and energy around providing three key resources for folks. We focus on education, climate advocacy, and greening houses of worship. So I'll go through each of those and give a little example of what we do. So first, education. By far, one of our most popular resources is Resources for Earth Day. Now, we know that every day is Earth Day, but with California IPL, we call it Faith Climate Action Week. So it's actually the 10 days surrounding Earth Day. So we get, the weekends around the main holiday to give space for congregations to use our resources for their times of worship. So we give away free Faith Climate Action Week kits. It's a downloadable resource kit, and it has things such as a reflection on the theme of the year. We have interfaith prayers and poems, book recommendations, movie recommendations with discussion questions. Those are quite common and really fun gatherings, as well as activities for children and youth groups. Now, the only expense with these kits is optional. We will have some advocacy opportunities, and if you want to engage your congregation further, you can order postcards related to our advocacy actions. So that is our Faith Climate Action Week kit. We haven't announced our theme for this year, but this past year we had a very popular one. The theme was Grounded in Growing, Planting the Seeds for Change, and we focused our time this Earth Day around the beautiful gift and spirituality around trees. In addition to Earth Day resources, if you want to engage CIPL with our educational materials, we're happy to visit your congregation. Happy to preach, or you'll see a picture of me on the right. I was hosting a climate resource table. I've done this both at congregations as well as like religious conferences. And it's just a great time to meet with folks and give practical resources on the individual and communal level, like for congregations, to take action on behalf of our planet. The next pillar of our work is climate advocacy, a very popular offering that we have. Over the years, CIPL and our member congregations, we have sent hundreds and thousands of emails to legislators urging for stronger climate policies. We have spoken at the local, state, and national government hearings, and we have even campaigned and fought against dirty energy and won. So it really is great to see the impact of us as we come together and hold our representatives accountable. And especially as people of faith and conscience, we have a very unique voice that we can contribute to the community, because we could say like, hey, there's all these financial benefits or these kind of benefits, but also we can be a moral compass. Because ultimately climate change is a moral imperative, and we can stand up, rooted in our faith traditions, to share that message. So if you want to get in touch with our climate advocacy offerings, the easiest way to do that is to become a member congregation and sign up for our email list. This keeps you in touch with our advocacy action alerts, as well as our other resources. And even more so, we don't charge any sort of dues or fees for becoming a member congregation. I mean, you'll receive emails from us like today on Giving Tuesday. But ultimately, we want to mobilize a network of congregations and houses of worship, because we try to represent you, the faith community here in California. So when we meet with our legislators, we give them a list of the 12 to 20 congregations in their district that stand behind these policies. So it really does capture the attention of our legislators. To share a little bit more about our advocacy days, in case you haven't participated in one before, we host 2 per year. One is in person in Sacramento, and the other one is virtual, very popular, especially here in Southern California, for the virtual advocacy day. And ultimately, everyone is welcome to join our Advocacy Day. You don't have to have any experience. CIPL will schedule advocacy meetings with your representative, and we will also give you all the educational resources and briefings about each year's priority bills. There'll be a policy lead in each of these meetings, so you can take some light notes. You don't have to be an expert in any of this, but ultimately we invite you to join us for these advocacy days because we want you to share stories about how these bills impact you, your neighborhoods, your house of worship, and especially vulnerable populations, as many faiths call us to protect and care for the most vulnerable in our community. So, sharing those personal stories and roles and representing your districts really helps us have a strong voice for climate justice. And finally, last but not least, we love to do very practical, sustainable projects and helping folks green their houses of worship. The main resource and program that I would like to highlight is our newest tree planting program called Our Sacred Canopy. And right now we are doing a very intentional push and advertisement to advertise this program before Tu B'Shvat. So if you have any kind of programming related to that and would like to have trees to either plant on your congregation facilities or give out into the community, we would love for you to sign up and learn more and see if you qualify. So like I said, we want to plant trees at houses of worship, give trees away in the community. We also have 2 educational opportunities, which is a workshop about tree equity. And we also have a short interfaith liturgy to where you can host a tree planting ceremony in one of your services or your Tu B'Shvat program. So please sign up. I'll send you the link to sign up during the Q&A. Our goal is to plant 3,300 trees in the communities that need it most. So please don't be shy, dream big of ways that we can care for our sacred earth in a very classic and reliable way of planting trees. And just to clarify, since we care about tree equity and have a grant overseeing this, eligibility for this program is determined by location. So just to see if you qualify, I'll send you a sign-up form just to get basic information, the address where trees will be planted, and then we can go from there. But I'd love to work with all of you, especially ahead of Tu B'Shvat. 2 more things I want to highlight, ways we work with congregations. We are in the business of helping folks go solar. We have a solar guide specifically geared for congregations. We know how folks operate in these spheres, and so we've tried to make a comprehensive guide to teach some terminology and share some lessons learned with a big project like rooftop solar. But we also have, resources for smaller projects like energy audits and other sustainability projects. So you can browse all of our resources at our website, interfaithpower.org. Once again, I'll drop this all in the chat, or I can send it to Rabbi Selah and Zev for any sort of follow-up emails as well. And last but not least, something that I would love to highlight specifically here in Southern California, we are working with congregations in Compton and doing outreach in South LA to encourage congregations to consider becoming a climate resilience hub. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's a whole other presentation that I would be happy to give, but maybe you've heard of some examples of climate resilience hubs like cooling centers or bad weather shelters. It's just a way to open up your facilities, during very specific times, like during extreme heat warnings or any sort of bad weather. So If you're interested in learning more or hearing a presentation about Resilience Hubs, please feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to connect with you on Zoom or do an in-person meeting. So I tried to be really quick just to give you just an overarching view of the different pillars of our work. But I would love to hear questions if you want any clarifications. So I'll stop sharing my screen, drop some stuff into the chat, and yeah, feel free to let me know what's on your mind.
Thank you, Becca. Can you give an example for people saying like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm just not sure how to get from step A to step Z in my particular institution, whether it's a synagogue, a school, a nonprofit. Can you give any examples of Jewish institutions that you worked with, and if you know how they did their process?
Yes, I would say, let's see, I don't know if anyone is on there, but Temple Isaiah has been a strong partner with us with our advocacy days. They're really great about, rallying the Jewish community with advocacy, as well as we've had good partnerships with DANU. I think I said that not quite right. But anyway, so I have more experience engaging the Jewish community through advocacy, but especially with our newer program, Our Sacred Canopy. I was excited to join this meeting to hopefully get some more synagogues involved. We have a couple that have signed up and plan to plant trees for their Tu B'Shvat ceremony, but that's coming up in February, so I haven't visited them in person yet, but good conversation.
Thank you. Any questions from the crowd?
The crowd would be me.
Anything, Jason?
No, I've got the website. I'm going to be taking a look at it, and I just want to thank you very much. Something I've been wanting to get involved in for some time. And my congregation is going to be co-locating with Adat Ariel. We completed an agreement, and so I think there are a lot of capital improvement possibilities through which we can partner with your organization if our partner congregation is so inclined.
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to stay in touch and kind of be in our network is through subscribing to our email list, which comes with becoming a member congregation. We send regular emails. We don't try and flood your inbox, but we do have just so many great resources and invitations to offer. So subscribing as a member congregation is the way to hear about these opportunities. Yeah.
Thank you. Signing up right now.
Thank you.
I wanted to take advantage to ask Jonathan a question. I didn't get to follow because I wanted to make sure Becca had time. Jonathan, I appreciate all the last part of your presentation where you talked about things people can do in terms of lowering, lessening, things like that, reducing. Is there any resources? Are there any resources in Southern California for meat, dairy, poultry, eggs that are not part of the factory farm system? I remember hearing about things 20 years ago when I lived in New York. It was a bit, burdensome. You had to, schlep out to a farm on Long Island or something like that, or they would, you had to sign up for one of 20 turkeys for Thanksgiving from one particular farmer in upstate New York. Is there anything going on in Southern California where obviously it's going to be more expensive and more inconvenient, but if people are willing to do that because they say, look, I've reduced as much as I can, I'm still eating some meat and I feel guilty, or it's not my values, but I can't stop. Is there any way to do meat, dairy, poultry, fowl consumption without it being unethical?
Yes and no, not in the way you were describing it. I mean, which is to say that, especially with meat, for example, you really have to find like a private shochet who's linked to a farm. And that's just a matter of catch as catch can, because otherwise, unless you're willing to go with an animal that wasn't slaughtered in a kosher manner, you can go to your farmers markets, and there you have some of those smaller farmers, those smaller farms and so forth, that the conditions aren't quite as problematic from the point of view of the mitzvah. With eggs, a lot of people talk about vitality eggs. And the cool thing about vitality is you can actually see they have cameras in their coops, because one of the things well, people talk about, well, cages are becoming we're meant to be phasing out cages in terms of chickens and so forth, and it's true, but all that means is we've just taken out the cages and just kept them in these incredibly cramped quarters anyway. And cage free means that basically there's cage free just means they're not in cages anymore. They're still never going to touch the ground, right? And range free simply means that, yeah, there's a door at the end of the coop that they can go out during their laying cycle and be outside. I mean, this is it's like a small door when there's thousands and thousands of chickens in this massive and cramped condition. So, even the things that get advertised as being better, the truth is you can slap on any label. So my experience has been, at least in the conversations I've had, when you go to those local farmer markets, are where you're probably going to get your better eggs in terms of these ethical considerations. And when it comes to meat, the only way that I've found so far for people to consistently be able to get meat is through things like Whole Foods. But even then, it's a struggle because it's so expensive. And I believe Grow and Behold is another organization that looks towards humane practices in terms, not only in terms of slaughter, but in terms of the way the animal is raised. But locally, not that I'm aware of. And I should also ask, I don't look that often for obvious reasons.
But if anyone would have heard, you would have.
I would kind of hope, but yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Any last thoughts from the peanut gallery?
Oh, we'll send out an email with the resources that were shared here and more follow-up things. Rabbi Bernhardt, if there's other things you want me to send out in the follow-up email, just email them to me. And yeah, thank you for taking the time.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Yeah,
both.
thanks for the invitation.
Thank
Wild
you, Becca.
fished. Wild versus farmed.
In terms of fish, yeah, I mean, farm fish are problematic. I mean, the fish stuff I'm not as familiar with as I am with the chicken and the beef. But farm fish incredibly problematic. But wild,
When you call about wild, do you know anything about the consumer information? How wild is wild?
that's I don't know. That is the right question. I do not know the answer to that.
I know Monterey Bay Aquarium has a good guide for like best, better, and not good fish based on different kinds of practices of farming wild and how it's caught in the wild. But
Right, because it's not enough just that it's wild. It's a matter of how it's caught, because different ways of catching fish can have impacts on the ocean. So even we think of wild nature, natural. Oh, that's got to be better. But even then, it's problematic.
Don't get any
Right.
wild sea bass.
All right. Did I mention to y'all that I'm really terrible at cocktail parties? Okay, just wanted to check, man. Just wanted to check.
Me too.
All right, we're at time. Thanks so much, everyone.
thank you guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks
rest of your
for
day.
putting
Take
this
care.
together.
You're welcome.